What do you mean you don't want to go to college? Cass asks. I run my hand through her silky hair and reply, I don't want to do anything, not without you. Well, I can probably get into any school that you get into, or we can do long distance if you can wait for me, she says with a smile. Of course I can, but, I say, trying to remember what the problem was. Okay, yeah, I guess I'll go to college. Local, though. I don't think I can take a day without seeing you. She smiles as she takes a sip of her coffee. We're on my porch, pretending to be adults by sipping on instant cappuccino. She takes hers with milk, almost half the cup full. I smile at her coffee-flavored milk. Our eyes meet. They glow bright with life. Not like what? So, did you pass your finals? I haven't taken them yet, I say. But don't worry, I'll pass them. The only class that will give me any trouble is... I trailed off as I noticed the color of the sky is the same as her eyes. Not similar, the exact same. Her eyes are beautiful, but not a normal sky color. The blue is too dark for this time of day. I look around. Why is the gas station across the street? What's going on? Translator module functioning, she says. Maintenance required. What? I ask. Biology? She says. That's the class that gives you trouble, right? Or is it anatomy and physiology? Oh, it's anatomy and physiology. The school got the gym teacher to do it, I reply. And he's bad at it. I look around again. We're not on my porch. We're in the road. Hey, are we supposed to be here? I ask. Of course, baby, she replies. This is where it happens. Where what happens? A thunderous crack rings out and the sky turns dark green in the blink of an eye. I panic and try to grab her hand. No one's there. I'm alone in the middle of the road. Where did she go? User interface non-functional. Interdimensional energy adapter functional. Personality matrix non-functional. Where's that voice coming from? What the hell is happening? Nanomechanical interface non-functional. So you think he's an orc? My eyes snap open to see a wooden ceiling. I know this ceiling. Damn it. What was that dream? I sit up and see the two orcs staring at me. Nash and Yulk, brothers. Nash was giving me a glare of suspicion, but Yulk was looking at me eagerly, like a child looking at Christmas presents. I'm not an orc, I said. I'm a human. No, I don't think you're an orc, Nick, Yulk said with a grin. I think you might be an ancestor of the orcs. What? Why would you think that? I asked. Well, look at the facts. You eat what we eat. You were found in our dungeon and we are roughly the same shape. You're a bit smaller, but that's evolution for you. But I came from another world, Yulk. We don't have magic where I come from. You can't have evolved from humans unless we came from here, I said while stretching. Also, I don't just eat what you eat. I also eat fruits and vegetables. I'll be okay if you keep giving me liver, but I'm not sure what the health effects long-term will be. There was a period of silence. Both orcs looked shocked at what I had just said. I thought we had discussed that I came from another world earlier, but thinking back I might not have made it clear. I remember telling them about trucks, but maybe I forgot to tell them we didn't have magic. You can eat vegetables? Nash asked, his hand resting on his axe. Yeah, why? The only species that can eat plants and meat that I know of is puppers, Yulk said. Even then, they either eat meat or eat plants depending on the teeth they're born with. Everything else is either carnivorous or herbivorous. My turn to be shocked. This can't be real. Carnivores and herbivores rule this world? But the evolutionary advantage that being an omnivore grants is so massive. How did this happen? Yep, carnivorous or herbivorous. What do you even call something that eats both? Nash asked. Omnivorous, I replied. That's further proof that I come from another world. Being omnivorous isn't all that rare where I come from. Omnivorous, Yulk mumbled. I see. All-consuming. So your kind eats all the plants and animals? Pretty much, but we domesticate animals and farm plants. Plus, we're not voracious eaters. Well, not all of us, I said with a smile. I'll be damned, look at his teeth, Nash exclaimed. Yes, they look like a mix of elf and orc teeth. How exciting. Maybe you're the ancestor of both elves and orcs, Yulk said as he started bouncing. Except that doesn't make any sense. Evolution rarely takes a step backwards. Being an omnivore is much more advantageous than being either an herbivore or a carnivore, I pointed out. I don't see how, Nash said. If you've got to eat both plants and meat, what do you do when you don't have one or the other? That's a good question, Yolk said. We can eat either or. I can be on a meat-only diet or on a vegetable-only diet for an extended period of time, I explained. In my world, there's people, humans who don't eat meat and humans who don't eat vegetables, but they take supplements to even out their nutrients. I chuckled to myself about the unexpected usage of my AP health class. I hadn't known exactly what I wanted to do for a career, but I was leaning toward the medical profession. The funny thing is that my teacher posed the specific problem of being trapped in a meat-only environment or a plant-only environment as one of test essays. Okay, so you're fine for now, but we should be looking out for plants you can eat, Nash said. Yes, please. Most fruits should be okay if herbivores eat them, I said. Then a thought occurred to me. Wait, maybe not. I might end up being allergic to some of the plants here. Ah, yes, rashes, sneezes, and diarrhea, and maybe sudden death, Yolk exclaimed. Don't worry, most allergies can be treated with magical healing. We've already determined that the healing works on you, so you don't have to worry about being cautious with food. Well, as long as you're near me. Oh, that's a relief. I was trying to remember how allergy tests worked. Healing magic sounds pretty handy. I wonder if it's replaced doctors. If magic users are common and they can all do healing, probably. Hey, wait a minute. What do you mean you've determined that healing magic works on me? I asked. Yolk smiled wide and said, It's how we... Nash moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move and clasped a hand over Yolk's mouth. Yolk's eyes went wild, and for a second he looked like he was going to attack Nash, but then he calmed down and nodded. Nash released his brother and looked at me. Don't worry about it, he said. I was stunned for a moment, but then guessed that I shouldn't push it. They probably used healing magic on me at some point. As far as why they didn't want to admit it, I could only guess. I looked at my hand again. The scar there had shrank. I wasn't just imagining it. That's a bit of a relief. How common is healing magic? I asked. Not very. It requires a few different things to happen for it to work properly. First, you have to be able to use magic. Not everyone can. I don't know what it's like for other races, but only about a third of our people can use it, Yolk explained. Next, you have to be able to conceptualize what the magic does. This means that you have to be able to somehow visualize the mending process of a wound. This grants you access to the healing spell, which you can use on anything you want. Finally, you have to have enough mana for the spell to heal the wound. If not, you'll pass out. Wait, so if I had a broken arm, you'd have to visualize my bone mending to be able to heal it? I asked. No, the spell works on anything once you gain the visualization. If you can visualize the mending process on skin that will unlock the spell for you, then you can use it on a broken arm while having no idea how the bone heals. There are people with large amounts of mana who can't visualize for shit, explained Nash. They have to have it happen to them before they can create a mental picture of it, so they usually end up with physical enhancement spells and find work as warriors. So, the better your imagination, the more powerful of a mage you can be? I asked. Partly, but it's mostly your knowledge of a certain subject. For instance, if you know how fire works but don't have much imagination, you'll be able to unlock middle-tier fire spells. If you have a great imagination but a limited knowledge of fire, same thing. If you have both intimate knowledge of how fire forms and a great imagination, you will unlock the highest tier of fire magic, Yolk said. Same with any other spell. So I probably couldn't summon a dragon then? Nash laughed and said, You could if you made it a pet and then trained it to come when you whistle, but with magic, no. People have pet dragons? I asked with a laugh. A couple of legendary heroes have been known to have dragon companions. There was a king about 300 years back who had a bunch of pet dragons, got a breeding pair and helped raise the young dragons. Had something like 15 of them, Nash replied. What happened to them? It was 17, and when he died they ran amok, destroyed his kingdom and started in on other kingdoms before they were finally defeated. About 12 of them were killed. The rest went to live in the wilderness somewhere. They're probably still alive, Yolk answered. Still alive? I asked with shock in my voice. Yeah, dragons don't die of old age, or at least, nobody has ever seen it happen. There's a dragon that's been living with elves for over 1,200 years now, Nash said. It doesn't do much, though. It's been at least 100 years since it went to sleep. The elves might have moved in after it fell asleep and built around it, Yulk said. No, they tamed the beast. This is known historical fact. I stayed silent as the brothers argued. Magic, dragons, elves, and orcs. I had definitely been transported to a fantasy realm. How? That's anyone's guess. Several feelings rushed through me at once. Excitement that I was in a magical new place to explore. Sadness at being away from Cass. Shame of my excitement. Setting those aside, I still had many questions. The most burning one, though. Do you think I could learn magic? I asked, interrupting the argument. Silence echoed through the room. The two brothers shared a look and then turned back to me. There was a long pause before Yulk finally spoke. Possibly, but not now. There's things going on that demands the chief's attention, and you aren't allowed to wander until he gives you his permission to. You're actually deeper within our village than most non-orcs are allowed, Nash explained. That's because you came from the dungeon. I don't know how the chief is going to approach this, and there may be a lot of legal things that he will need to decide upon. For instance, you were in the dungeon since before we orcs claimed it, which means you might have a legal claim to the dungeon. I doubt that, Yulk said. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to enter it. Not necessarily. Since he was already inside, the barrier may have counted it as an open invitation sort of thing. If that were the case, then the rest of your party would have been teleported out when he was carried out of the dungeon. Even if that weren't the case, the rescue party wouldn't have been able to go in after them. No, it's definitely an orc dungeon. What do you mean by orc dungeon? I asked. And what's this legal claim stuff? Well, you have to pay to claim a dungeon, and you can claim it for either your species or your faction. Most claim dungeons for a species because the loot changes based on who the claim is for. For instance, if you claim it for a kingdom, most of the loot is going to be food or wood or things like that. Claiming for a species can grant magical items and weapons, though, Yulk explained. Claiming for an adventuring faction grants the best loot, but then only people from that faction could use the dungeon, which is a dangerous thing, politically. So kingdoms, which are the only ones who can afford the cost, usually claim for species. Yep, and the Delver's dungeon is an orc dungeon. Probably, Nash said. Anyway, the chief has a lot of things on his plate at the moment, so you won't be going anywhere for a while, and neither will we. Why did your party need to be rescued? I asked Nash. We got separated. I found you instead of them. I decided to take you with me, and when I picked you up, I was teleported to the dungeon entrance. We had gone a long ways inside, so I opted to carry you out and report instead of finding the others, Nash said with a hint of shame. So they're still trapped in the dungeon? We don't know if they're trapped or even in trouble, but it's been days, and they should have been back by now, Yulk explained. So the chief decided to send some over-10s in after them. Over-10s? I asked. Adventurers that are over skill level 10, Nash replied. Level? The orcs once again shared a look. Yulk shrugged. Even more proof you're from another world. Damn, I was hoping that you were an orc ancestor or something, he said. The Kuragard determines levels. When you register as an adventurer through a church, guild, or governmental organization, a link is formed between you and the Kuragard. The Kuragard assesses your skills, spells, and strengths and assigns you a level that is shared with all participating organizations. This level determines what kind of jobs you can accept and gives you an idea of where you stack up against other adventurers, Nash explained. Does the Kuragard give you skills or anything? I asked. No, Yulk said. You get skills and strength through training and practical application. You get spells through study and practice. The Kuragard just keeps track. A soft knock at the door interrupted my interrogation of the orcs. The door opened to reveal the cute orc girl carrying another platter of food and drink. She avoided meeting eyes with me and delicately set down the new platter. As she left the room, a different sort of question came to me. How long was I asleep this time? I asked. 2 days, Nash replied. As the revelation that I had slept for 2 whole days dawned on me, so did the smell of the meat. The hunger that had previously gone unnoticed suddenly announced itself in the form of my stomach growling. The 2 orcs chuckled as I began to eat and drink. The front teeth appear to be narrow at the tips to cut through food items, and the teeth next to them look like they rip apart sections of the meat quite nicely. Fascinating, Yulk said. Puish dun eksham in me will I eat, I said through a mouthful of liver. Itch embarrashin'. Don't mind me, human. I'm just trying to non-invasively determine more about your origin. Better than the alternative, I would think, the orc said with a slightly malicious smile. I gulped down the gamey meat as the implication of what he said hit home. It hadn't occurred to me earlier, but Yulk definitely fit the profile of a mad scientist who would vivisect me if given half the chance. I didn't take very long to think of my response. Fine. Look, but don't touch, please, I said. Yulk frowned mockingly, and Nash laughed. I picked up my drink to wash down the aftertaste of my meal as the door to the room burst open. Nash, the rescue party's back, a different orc girl exclaimed. The chief wants you to bring the human. Nash rose from his seat on the bed opposite mine and looked down at me, suddenly serious. He tossed some clothes at me, and I caught them. A shirt and pants, again woven instead of made from hide. Not exactly medieval, but similar in style. I met his gaze. Get dressed and let's go, he said. Been a while since I was last in the dungeon, Alern said as we reached the collapsed wall. Same, not since I reached level 9, Rirnu replied. I was in here last year, Pokken the Vile added. I remained silent. Why would it matter how long it had been? The dungeon changes frequently, passageways shifting and sliding to reveal new threats and rewards. Monster materials, magic cores, gems, precious metals, and even weapons and armor were all up for grabs by those who had the tenacity to brave the depths. Woe be to any who became complacent and assured of victory, though. The dungeon you entered yesterday may very well not be the same dungeon you enter today. Rookie adventurers that learned this fact about dungeons were terrified of being present within the dungeon when the changes took place. It's a natural fear. Being deep within the dungeon with no hope of return would end only in a terrible death. Their fears are allayed when they learn that the dungeon forcefully teleports those within to its entrance when it begins to change. It was for this reason that Alern and I had been opposed to waiting until the morning to enter the dungeon. If the dungeon had shifted in such a way as to block the passage, we would never know what happened to the lost party if they weren't teleported to the entrance. We would only know that they had died. The chief had forced us to wait, though, to make certain we were properly supplied and to give the lost party one last chance to make it to the entrance. I looked at the pile of bricks that laid on the floor of the dungeon. The mortar had come loose, and the weight of the bricks had pulled this section of wall down, exposing a previously hidden passageway. The passageway was lit by stones that had been inserted into the ceiling and gave off a bright white light. It struck me as odd and out of place. Magical stones that gave off light were not cheap, but these were installed every 20 bricks and provided enough light that one would swear a window were nearby. It was far brighter than the rest of the dungeon, and indeed even brighter than most buildings I had been in. I had never seen nor heard of anything like it before. Gluhern was a fool to send under-10s to investigate. This feels wrong, Rirnu said as we entered the hall. I can't quite figure out why, though. There is a suspicious lack of dust, I added. Silence fell over the party as they came to the same realization. It had also been the first time I had spoken since we entered the dungeon. I would have been more verbose if our party hadn't included Pakin the Vile. One's magic tells tales of one's mind, and necromancy was evidence of a twisted mind. She had gained renown by making herself useful to the village, and many believed her to be a valuable adventurer. But I knew the truth. I knew of her sojourns to the wastes, to find corpses to experiment on. I had watched as she revived her former comrades as mindless husks to fight her battles for her. I had seen her disregard them after those battles without a second thought. Her magic told a tale of egomania and narcissism, but she masked it well with strategically utilized friendliness and kindness. She was with us only because she was also skilled with offensive and healing magic. Her zombies are much weaker than the bodies that supplied them, so her necromancy would be useless in the rescue of adventurers over level 5, or the pacification of monsters that could kill those adventurers. This is the fork that Nash mentioned. He went left, so they probably went right, Alern said. See, Kirasaka? It wasn't a waste of time to interview him after all. A rare occurrence indeed, for it not to be a waste of time to speak with Nash, I replied. Chuckles came from the rest of the party. Nash was well known for being rambunctious and annoying. When paired with his brother, he became conniving as well. The Alta brothers were troublemakers, of this there was no doubt. Still, their antics brought about good humors most of the time. I was glad that they weren't a part of this rescue team. I have a foreboding feeling about what's to come. We followed the passage without incident until we came upon sheer and utter darkness. The next part of the passage seemed to be lacking the stones that lit the rest of it. The other party members activated their various lighting mechanisms. The two magic users created small balls of light, and Alern activated his own magical stone inlay on his armor's pauldron. These lights were bright enough to allow us to see that the rest of the passage looked much like that which we had already traveled. I did not activate any lights of my own. The shadows are my allies, and by shunning them I would weaken my combat effectiveness. This darkness nearly set me at ease, for it was far more natural for a dungeon to be dark than for it to be well lit. Do you think a collapse might have prevented their return? Rirnu asked. It's possible, Alern responded. I hope that's the case. Any other reason for delay would be unfortunate, Pokken the Vile added. I remained silent as we continued on. Like the party we were sent to rescue, we had been traveling for about a day. A sudden sense of dread came over me. What if the reason that Nash had teleported hadn't been picking up the human? What if it had been because the dungeon was shifting, and the discovery of the human had been coincidental? Then the reason that the rest of the party hadn't been teleported as well would be that they were dead. I opted to keep this line of thought to myself. Nothing good could come of voicing my concerns, and the rest of this party likely had come to the same conclusion. It wouldn't change what we had to do. We had to find the lost party and determine their fate. If it is a collapse, they'd stay nearby the blocked portion of the passage, Alern said. So we just have to find the collapse and dig them out. Easy, Rirnu said. Do you think we'll have to share our food? No, they should have enough. They would have brought 7 days' worth of rations. It's only been 4, Pokken the Vile said. Pokken's right, Alern chimed in. There's no reason to worry about them going hungry. Alern cut his sentence short as a soft sound began emanating from ahead of us just out of sight. We stopped and listened to the squelching and crunching. Our gazes met. It was a sound that we were all familiar with. The sound of a predator eating its prey. We quietly armed ourselves and continued forward slowly and with steady feet. As we crept down the passageway, I noted that the lights hadn't been missing at all. They had been slashed and rendered ineffective. I quietly pointed this out to the rest of the party. We spent a moment quietly guessing to ourselves if the slashing had been done by blade or claw. Then we continued moving, following both the passage and the unnerving sounds of consumption. The passage soon opened into a spacious chamber, held up by smooth brown pillars. The floor and walls were also brown. The light glinted off of something metallic on the floor. I gestured for my fellows to halt and edged closer to get a better look at the object, the squelching and crunching getting louder with each step. What I saw, I could barely make sense of. My confused eyes studied the object until realization made my blood run cold. It was a piece of breastplate, shorn cleanly just above the pectoral guards. The metal of the breastplate was thick, but the cut was smooth, as if someone had taken scissors to a piece of cloth. Whatever had done this was unbelievably powerful or sharp, or both. I looked at Alern, realizing that his armor would likely only be a hindrance in the coming fight. Our eyes met, and by his steely gaze I could tell he had realized it as well. We continued further into the chamber, and I glanced around for signs of the enemy. I noticed patches of white on the ground, walls, and pillars. I looked closer and realized that the room had originally been white, and with a sniff, I came to the conclusion that the brown staining was from blood. I looked around with horror, the blood stains covering nearly every inch of the chamber. It was more blood than one orc could possibly provide. The light suddenly shined upon a figure, hunched over with its back to us. Its skin was sickeningly pale with thin white fur, so thin that the fur was largely absent with the exception of the creature's crown. The hair upon its head was so abundant that it fell past its shoulders, moving almost hypnotically with the twists and jerks of the beast. These movements aligned with the squelching and crunching, and I soon realized it was holding what was left of an arm. We froze. The horror before us finished its grim meal and turned to face us, rising as it did so. It was as tall as I was and stood on two legs just as I did. I looked upon a face that could have been my own, were it not so pale. The only color on this creature were its blackened eyes, sunken into its skull from disuse, and the fresh blood dripping from its maw. From the tips of its stiffened fingers extended long claws, discolored by blood both new and old. They were the size of daggers, and almost assuredly just as sharp. I quickly stepped into the shadows as the rest of the party readied themselves to fight the creature. It turned his head to follow my movements, as if it knew where I was without having to see me. It was smiling at me. "Pokken, burn the bastard!" shouted Alurn. Pokken the Vile took a stance and shouted, "On refni reterg TSA!" I was barely able to follow what happened. I watched helplessly as the creature moved in one swift motion, closing the distance between itself and Pokken and separating her from her head before she could finish her spell. I watched as her face grew confused and then shocked before it stopped moving entirely. Her body crumpled to the ground, her magical ball of light snuffing out and shrouding the creature in darkness once again. "Run!" I shouted as I charged the creature. My blades met claws with a sound similar to thunder. The creature was just as strong as I had feared, and it pushed me until my back pressed against the nearest pillar. "Kirisaka!" Alurn shouted, hefting his sword to ready a blow. "No! Run! Run now! Go!" I shouted, struggling against the creature's might. "They have to go! They need to warn the chief! The lost party is dead, and any further rescuers will die as well. I'm the best matchup against this creature's strength and speed. They have to realize this." "Go warn them!" I screamed as the creature tilted its claws to dig into my shoulder. With pained expressions, they turned and fled. I sent a bone-shattering kick into the knee of the creature. Instead of collapsing as it should have, it merely lost its balance long enough for me to free myself. I ran deeper into the chamber, trying to draw it away from my fleeing comrades. It followed me into the darkness. "Noisiv Wodasz-Zak," I said, casting shadow vision just in time to dodge a wild slash from the creature's clawed hand. I counter-slashed and scored a blow on its outer thigh. It didn't go as deep as I had hoped. I slashed and dodged again and again, the creature matching my movements with impossible skill. The macabre smile never left its face. I tapped into every fight I'd ever fought, every training session I'd ever been in, every trick I had learned or seen trying to find a way to score a decisive blow. The creature managed to dodge most of them. Those that it didn't weren't enough to even give it pause. I'm getting tired. I don't know how long it's been. I hope they managed to get away. It's a fair trade. No, there's no time for melancholy. An opening. I perform a standard double slash with all of my strength, aiming for the creature's exposed neck. The creature slashes at my swords just before the blow hits home in an attempt to block. I use the momentum from the slash to roll and put some distance between us. I hear pieces of metal strike the ground and bounce. I look at my swords, and to my horror, I'm only holding the hilts. The creature turns to me and I cast the broken blades aside and draw my knives. As the beast approaches, I throw one of them as hard as I can. A palpable blow. The knife sinks directly into the creature's eye. It stops dead in its tracks, and I breathe a sigh of relief. Then the creature reaches up to its face and pulls the blade out of its skull, tearing its own eye out with it. The bastard is still smiling, even as its own blackened blood flows down its face. "Fuck you!" I shout defiantly as I bring my final knife to bear. It charges at me. I barely manage to dodge the strike, slicing into its arm as I do. Another shallow blow, barely enough to draw blood. Curse this vile fiend. It slashes at me once again, but this time it anticipates my dodge and kicks at me as well. I am sent flying, the shock stifling the pain. I slam into a pillar, dropping my knife, but I manage rise fast enough to grab the creature's hands, temporarily preventing it from impaling me. I struggle against its strength, trying to move the claws away from my chest. But the creature is strong, and they inch closer and closer. I stare into its remaining eye with determination, but the claws inch closer and closer. I scream at the beast as I feel the claws pierce my armor, and then my skin, and then my bones, and finally, my scream is cut short as the claws rip into my lungs. I let go of one of the hands and reach for the creature's head, grasping its ear and tearing it off. The creature rears back in pain, pulling its claws from my chest. Too late, though. Even as the creature fills the air with shrieks, I can no longer breathe. The ear falls from my hand to the ground along with my blood. As my vision fades, I see my prize for the first time. I mentally chuckle at the absurdity of the shape of the ear. Whoever heard of a round ear?